Ron, that was amazing. Thank you. I very much appreciate that. You said something, you had a quote that I loved. You said, other people continue to fight for what Paul called rubbish. You know, think about how Paul persecuted Christians. And he was zealous in that. And my question is, do you think that we can turn to this passage and use it for evangelism? And tell other people, I used to fight for things I shouldn't. But now I'm doing my best to fight for Christ. And you can do the same. Do you think this passage would be good for evangelism?
Well, in that particular place, of course, what Paul mentioned was rubbish, were things that in and of themselves weren't bad. You know, they could and would have been possessions, it would have been other things of the Jewish faith. I don't know that you could use that verse for it, but your point, I think, could still be made.
All righty. Anybody else? Yes, sir. Brother Richard. Okay, good. We got two more here. Rob, there you go.
Good job, brother. Let me ask you, it was brought up earlier before your talk, and then you know, what about how does preaching the word, and we don't have debates like we used to, but in regard to what you were saying about how the word should be taught, how does debates fit into that?
I think debates are legitimate, but again, it depends on the men that are participating in it. I mean, we both heard debates where there were statements being made, they were in opposition of one another, but they were still loving gentlemen. And other times where I've had attended one time where a man's own people that agreed with his position were very embarrassed and didn't agree with the way that he was presenting it, which would go along kind of like with 1 Corinthians 13. Even if you have the truth, you need to present it in the proper way. I think debates can be profitable, and going back and forth in discussions like that, and I have no problem with them. Again, they need to be done in the right way. You have another thought in mind with that?
No, I just wondered what you thought about
Yeah,
that.
I don't believe that I'm a debater. We have men that have been and are very skilled, but no, I don't think that they are wrong in and of themselves.
I will just give an illustration here. We have a brother in South Africa that has come to do evangelism, and he went into a congregation that uses multiple cups in there, and he ended up taking quite a few people out of that group to worship correctly. It wasn't easy. He said he met lots of resistance.
Yeah.
And I know years ago, Ronnie Wade suggested that maybe we should be doing that on Sunday evenings and Wednesday evenings, going and visiting some of these churches that we have, you know, a lot of similar beliefs, but we do have some doctrinal differences, and approaching people. That's preaching the word. How do you feel about that?
You know, I've done that before, as I think most of us have that maybe been around a little while. But usually when you see a stranger walk through the door of your assembly, usually we think, hey, here's someone interested, we might be able to get them. And that's what they're thinking. That here's an opportunity for us to gain somebody. And I know of different ones of our number. It wasn't necessarily in that kind of situation, but they started studying Doctrine X because they were going to prove the ones who held that position wrong and convert them. And they converted themselves into the false doctrine. So sometimes I think it's kind of going at it the wrong way. Jesus and the apostles, they went into the synagogues. They didn't go into the demons' temples. Now, in open or in the public, they spoke where they could. The Apostle Paul, there in Athens. But we don't see them going into the places of error, seems like, or of the false teachings, and then trying to bring them out. Anymore, I think, for me, there can be danger, because then I think some of the novice may be trying that, and they get themselves in trouble.
Okay.
And again, that's under the scripture of opinions.
Brother Wall.
Thank you. I really appreciate that, especially from a young man's perspective. That's just super.
This young man?
My I wanted to highlight one thing that you had emphasized. I wrote a quote down. You said that Paul emphasized the message of Christ and not the man Paul. And especially speaking from my own perspective, I can't read other people's motives, obviously, but from a young man's perspective, whenever you get into preaching a little bit, preaching at meetings, just thinking about preaching in general, it's really easy to start to emphasize yourself instead of the man Christ. And if I live my entire life and I'm the person that's emphasized, if people look at me as a great person and I die that way, then I failed completely at my mission, like even as a human being. And so I guess I was just curious if you had any practical advice for that, because at its core, what I hear in that is humility.
Mm-hmm.
And it's easy to tell yourself, oh, I need to be humble. But whenever you get up, especially for a young person, you get up in front of an audience, I mean, just being practical about it, you get up in front of an audience of hundreds of people, there's a lot of pressure on you. Maybe there's some young lady in the audience you're trying to impress. Like, there's all sorts of factors that go into that. But even just living your life in general in a humble way, we all know that we need to do that. But sometimes it's easier said than done. Do you have any practical advice?
Well, I think it's kind of like what I read there is you fight against thinking that about yourself. Yeah, I'm a pretty slick guy, you know, I'm just pretty good. Or beware of, like, the little book, the Screw Tape Letters. And the junior demon was concerned because his patient had learned about humility. So then the senior demon told the junior demon, tell your person, make them proud of their humility. Tell him he's humble. You know, so we can't start thinking of ourselves in that way. Peter called Paul our beloved Apostle Paul, but Paul wasn't telling others to think of him in that way. We need to live a very good, honest, and life of humility, but let others recognize it and don't be seeking the recognition. Like I say, I like still that of John the Baptist. He must increase, I must decrease. The more we preach, we would hope that they see and learn more about Christ and less about us.
All righty, we have a little time left, and we have nobody got the hand up. All right. There we go. Brother Gibson.
What I've got in mind here to speak is in 1 Corinthians 9, where it says, to the Jews I became a Jew, so that you could gain their trust and their faith for Christ. To those under the law, I became those under the law, that I could gain them that are under the law. And those without laws, as without law. There's limits to how much we can identify with someone who's living in error.
Sure.
That, do you have any advice or experience with, you know, how do you associate with them to the point that you gain their trust as I'm like you, and yet still, you know, maintain your independence and your allegiance to the Word.
Well, we always have the guidelines, or might say the parameters of the scriptures, and we never can step outside of those. I'm reluctant to always give personal examples, but still there's places where we always meet people, we have friends or acquaintances that's outside of the congregation, whether it's at the grocery store, the bank, the hardware store, or whatever. And those aren't places of worship, but there can be areas where you can treat those individuals and those people kind of like the parent does their children, as they were told in Deuteronomy. When you rise up, when you lay down, when you walk along the way, there's things you can bring in and give spiritual application in all of those different situations, and where they can see some similarities in one another's life, and then make the spiritual application.
Anybody else? Okay. So we go to Nate next. Is that working? Thank you, Brian, again. You know, in Acts' 15th chapter, when Paul and Barnabas had their clash, Paul chose Silas, being recommended by the brethren, using the King James rendering. It is a motivation to keep our, as Clovis Cook taught me when I was 17 years old preaching, he said, keep your skirt clean. You know, we got to keep our head above water. We got to do the right thing and make good decisions. And it's really important for every age of everybody to keep themselves being able to be recommended by the brethren, regardless of their age. But especially when Paul was going to choose someone to go with him, he chose somebody being recommended. So the two things: number one, individually, we all need to make sure that we are living a life that we can be recommended by the congregation. And then, of course, secondly, it was a situation that Paul wanted somebody to go with him, and he wanted to make sure he got somebody that was reputable.
Yeah.
And I thoroughly think there's a major point to be drawn from that. Congregations really should get in a habit, suggestion only, but to write a little note recommending the brethren who are maybe moving away, or even sisters that are moving away. They're faithful, congregate, faithful at 21st Street, they're moving to wherever, and to give them a letter of recommendation. So there'll be no issues at all there.
Right.
Just a thought.
Yeah.
Okay, 47 years ago, I had a debate in Stockton, California, and I had a debate with a gentleman by the name of Ralph Baker. Ralph is a very nice guy. We had a good debate. It was a 4-night debate on the communion, though there were fewer to come by back in those days. But one thing that was interesting, this year, I've probably heard from him 3 or 4 times. We've communicated after 47 years, and he said he's revisiting the subject of the communion. So we had a really good talk. We've had several talks. Lord willing, fall continues well. I have a meeting in Lodi, California, the last part of February, and he's planning to come. He's moved to California now, or to that part of California, and so he lives around Lodi area. So I've already told him about Alan Boniface, send him his address, send him the location of the church, and things like that. So, and that brought to my mind after you and Richard discussed a little bit about debates. Debates are very positive when handled correctly.
Yeah.
That's your deal. Attitudes, if they have a bad attitude, go fishing or do something different than debate. But just be nice, speak the truth, and speak it in love. Be kind, be considerate, follow all the attributes of Scripture. That's what I'm thinking of. Okay, is anyone at Brother Nathan right here? Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. One of the points that you made was the concept of, there are times when we shouldn't waste our time with either certain individuals or certain topics. And you made the comment that part of that is just learning by experience when to make that decision. But as someone with experience, are there any practical tips that you have or things that you've learned for us to think about other than just learning the hard way? What are some of those indications?
Well, almost got away.
Oh, you did?
Sometime you know the person Sometimes you don't. But just some of the topics of translations. Some people want to come up with one and believe that, we have an English translation of some sort that's heavenly inspired, and that's what they want to hang on and bang on. I think that's something that would just end up being unprofitable. There have been debates. There's places that don't want that in the building. And invitation song. What to do with the items of communion after the service is over. A lot of it comes down in almost, to me, like what Paul says, just disputes over words. I can't say that I have. Well, here's a small workbook to go through and you'll be able to recognize it. I think, doesn't mean you wouldn't discuss something at all, but it usually doesn't take too many times for you to figure out if it's going anywhere. Or if someone just flat refuses to listen to reasoning or scripture. I'm not doing any better than that right there. It would turn into something useless if I kept trying to.
Follow up? Jimmy Caden.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate very much everything you said. I know there's a lot of young men here, and certainly commend what you said to them. And as young men who are tasked with the challenge of proving themselves, the challenge is to do so without making it about themselves. And when you look at Paul, he didn't make it about himself. He made it about Christ. And there was a quote I ran across a while back attributed to an 18th century missionary. He said simply, preach, die, and be forgotten. And that is our mission as preachers of the gospel. I don't know who came up with this saying, but it has become my motto. I'm just a nobody who's trying to tell everybody about somebody who can save anybody. And so as these young men who are training to preach and working to preach, they must be like Timothy, prove themselves, but not make it about themselves.
Right.
And so I commend you because you're a man who has done that, and in your quiet way has been consistent, and I appreciate your example to all of us. Thank you for that.
In speaking about the young and them learning, I like Proverbs 19 and 20. Listen to counsel, receive instruction, that you may be wise in your latter days. Too many think they already know it all. And if you think you know it all, you can't learn anything. But we need to learn to listen. In my day of growing up, I listened a lot, but it wasn't because I always had the proper respect. But I was afraid of the one who was telling me, But I learned then later they were right. And on another side of that, with the young coming on, I think the brotherhood needs to pay attention as well, and not put a young, talented teacher, preacher to be, up on a pedestal and tell them how wonderful they are. Compliment them, encourage them, yes. But if pride could take down the one that's known as Satan, what can it do to a person or a young person? Don't build up their pride. And Paul didn't do that to Timothy. But we don't want to be guilty of contributing to one's fall by feeding their pride.
Follow up, Brother Jimmy? Okay. Any of our young preachers or anybody have any comments, questions you'd like to make? You're welcome to do it. All right, Bill, you're not young, but you're good. All right, Brother Bill first. He's younger than me though. Then Josiah and Nicholas after that.
To Brother Jimmy's comments
Then I can sit down.
and your follow-up or your answer reply. Several years ago, a few years ago, I studied on leadership and came across two quotes that I thought was worth keeping in my phone. And I don't carry them with me except in my phone. And it took me a little while to find it this morning while you were presenting your talk. And by the way, that was very good, very good. And so I would just want to read the two quotes. Position hunters and place seekers are weights in the church and retard the growth and development of the kingdom of Christ. We need men as humble as children and with the characteristics of a guileless child, free from malice, to build up the church of God. Such will never have to seek a position. The position will seek them. That is an unnamed source, but is found in the sermons and writings of Homer L. King. The other, the best qualified are always the most modest and backward, while those least qualified to preside or to lead push themselves forward. If then the brethren will not give their voice in favor of those they judge best qualified, they must give themselves up into the hands of an individual more zealous than intelligent, more confident than modest, or more conceited than wise in the affairs of the kingdom of heaven. And that is found in the Gospel Sermons of T.W. Brace. He's quoting Alexander King.
Thanks, Bill.
Josiah?
Thank you very much, Brian. Enjoyed that very much. When I was younger and I wanted to preach, I came to these studies and asked people, and they said, get your degree first. So you get your degree, and then I was looking around and I didn't know what to do after that. And so talked to Kevin Presley, he told me to wait. And in my great wisdom, I said, I know who I want to stay with. I want to stay with Nate Bivens. And I went to Dennis Smith and he said, I know you see Nate as a peer, but he said, well, I need someone older. And I'm glad he thought of me as a peer to Nate. But at the end of the day, my question is, who do we go to when we don't know who to look to for mentorship? And what is our relationship with the older guys in selecting? I didn't need to say, I want to go stay with Nate. I needed to study with the individuals around me, stay at the congregation that I was at. So when we get to that age, let's just say the end of college, where do you go, what do you do?
Is this getting outside my topic?
Oh no, it's right on it.
I want everyone to know these two guys plotted against me. But, well, I think, especially someone like you, Josiah, you know the brethren in the brotherhood, and sometimes it may be the preacher that, as far as personalities go, you may not like as much, but you recognize them as a true Bible student and one able to teach. And look for those qualities, not necessarily looking for a buddy, but look for the qualities of one who's definitely living what they're teaching and who would then, like Paul, want to pass it on to someone else to keep on teaching and live the way he had taught and lived. So, and everybody isn't compatible with another, but find one that you can learn from. Some of the best teachers I had through school, some of the ones that I learned the most from were the ones that personality-wise, I didn't want to be around them, but they knew their stuff and they were willing to teach me. And is what was important at the time. His willingness to teach, my willingness to learn, personalities aside.
You did good on that. Anybody else? Hands up. Going once? Going twice? Would you like to make a closing comment?
Good. Thank
Okay,
you.
good deal. Thank you very much, Brian, you did